Hi, now I'm going to walk you through your S2. This is your second session. And as you'll see, when you click on one, the real focus of this is going to be understanding how well the client meets DSM criteria. We're not going to want to say it to them in that words. I have, other more specific words here that are a little gentler, but that's what we're doing. Throughout, I want to remind you it's okay to reword questions and whatever you need to do to ensure comprehension. Sometimes you might have to be more direct. I try to really keep the questions more open-ended in order to elicit information, but sometimes to support someone's comprehension and ability to answer, you might have to be a little direct. This is particularly true with like the have you ever questions. If you've got a client who has difficulty understanding that language, it's okay to put a time frame on it to help them better conceive of the question. The first thing you'll see if you haven't already done the conversational press from the S1 is you'll get another reminder to do that and to do the corresponding questions for that at the end. If you've already done it, it doesn't matter, you won't get it, so don't worry about it. Okay. The first section is social emotional reciprocity. I really want you to think of this like a back and forth. A lot of people talk about tennis or ping pong, whatever. Think about a back and forth give and take. This is what we're trying to find out, how the person does with that back and forth give and take. And so the areas to cover for this are reciprocity in conversation, initiation of interactions, sharing of interests, emotions, and affect, the person's expressive language, and in particular, what we're asking for adults is how well do they know how to modify their expressive language based on context and situation? And then finally, the childhood report of social emotional reciprocity differences. So I'm going to scroll back to the top of this. First, you ask about conversation and chit chat kinds of things. After you ask these questions and record what the client tells you, you'll see a yellow summary box. And here, what I want you to do is to do your best to pick an option based on what the client has said. Sometimes these are not going to fit perfectly, and that is okay. I just want you to pick your best option. I also really want to point out the social anxiety limits interactions option. I put that in a lot of the social emotional reciprocity questions, and that's because sometimes clients will give an answer that very clearly shows they feel anxious in the social situation, but doesn't really explain anything about not really knowing what to do or say. And you have to really listen for that because sometimes someone who's anxious but has the skills will say, I don't know what to do or say. When they really do, they just don't feel confident about it. So just know you've got this social anxiety option, but you've got options for someone who says they really don't have any challenge with conversations and chat. People for whom, small talk might be hard. They might not love it, but they do it. And then there are people who just can't do it and they just avoid it entirely. Again, your option might not fit perfectly, but that's okay. Get as close as you can. And then when you get to the report writer later, you have the option of customizing for your client. Next, we have the initiation of interactions. So if there's a conversation happening, does a person know how to join? How do they start conversations in general? Do they know when it's a good time to jump in? And your options here, again, you've got the social anxiety one. You've got the option for people who just don't have conversations, and then you've got these other gradients. Next is sharing of interests, emotions, and affect. What's it like for you to listen when other people talk, when they're saying what they've been up to or what they're doing? So what's that like? What's that experience like for the client? And then also understanding, do you usually get what people are talking about? Can you tell if people are sarcastic? And that's all the things that are communicated in language. Like, do you really understand the language of it? And then here, you need to pick the option. Which one best summarizes what the client had to say about their interest in sharing? Are they interested? Are they sometimes interested? Or is there little to no interest? Again, sometimes it's going to be a little bit of a guess here because it's not going to be perfect. But when the sentence auto completes for you in the report, you can customize it to the client. The next yellow box is about summarizing the client's report of understanding with others. And do they generally understand what others are feeling and talking about? Do they only sometimes understand it, or is there little to no understanding? Again, their interest can really differ from how well they understand what's happening. Somebody might be incredibly interested, but just can't do it, just doesn't have the skills to do it, and vice versa. So just making sure we're differentiating what the issue is there. And then for expressive language, we're having just the question about how often does the client say things that aren't right for the situation, that can be disruptive or upsetting, not fit the context. For the most part, the clients we see are not going to have a very clear expressive language deficit like you might see in somebody who needs more support. So we don't really ask a lot about, expressive language in general, but this will really help you understand different contexts and whether the person knows how to communicate in different situations. And then the yellow box will summarize. Don't get stuck between sometimes and often. Just pick whichever one you think is best. And then again, you can customize it later. And then for every question we're going to go through for the DSM, you're going to be asked about social emotional reciprocity. So how was this different in childhood? What do you remember? And then with that, the questions are always going to be the same. If everything is exactly the same in childhood as it was now that they're an adult and nothing has changed significantly, choose same in childhood. If the differences are less pronounced now than they were in childhood, you would pick less pronounced. This might be somebody who learned some coping skills, learned to manage some situations, and can navigate better. That'd be less pronounced. More pronounced would be somebody who maybe didn't have that many challenges in childhood, but has found it harder and harder as they get older. And then finally, no differences in childhood is somebody who would say that I had absolutely no differences when I was a child. Everything was absolutely the same, absolutely as expected. Okay, the next section is nonverbal cues. As you can see, my little red warning box came up, and that's because I didn't type anything into all of those social emotional reciprocity questions. So that's just your validity check to make sure you're being complete in the evaluation. Nonverbal communication, first you're going to ask about reading others, like how do other people show you what they feel and can you interpret that? So what's it like if someone close to you is distressed about something, and not something you did, but they're just distressed in general, or they feel sick? Can you tell? How do you handle it? What might you do? And then some examples are, if somebody is really having trouble with this question, you can give examples of a breakup or a bad headache or whatever. And we start with that kind of broad question because clients might give you really rich information. But we also have a more targeted question because sometimes you don't get the information you need. So how well can you tell in general what other people are feeling by looking at them? Can you tell if they're nervous, angry, bored? Can you tell from their face or body how they feel? A lot of times clients will know if somebody is like really excited or really mad, but they might have trouble with more subtle characteristics, and that'd be a really good thing to note. And then the summary question there is, for understanding, inconsistently, or sometimes, so any kind of mixed answer, you want to put that. And then somebody who really struggles with this, you want to put almost never or never. Use of communication is how effective is the client at communicating to others? So can other people generally tell how they feel just based on their face, body language, or gestures? And again, there's a reminder in the green for what you can prompt. And then here are the options to choose based on what they say. Always just pick what you think is closest sometimes or often, and don't get too caught up on that. Interpreting others' tone. So it's interesting that this goes into nonverbal. So if it's not really about the language that someone's using, but it's more about the tone and what they're implying with it, that becomes a nonverbal communication thing. So can you tell when people are sarcastic or joking? So you understand the semantics of what they're saying, but do you understand what they're really intending by what they say? There's a little green note to help you with that too. How do you figure out what someone means or how they feel? And then how often are you misunderstood or do you misinterpret? And then you can rate those. Use of eye gaze is next. Some clients will tell you that they've learned very specifically how to make eye gaze. Other people, it's not an issue for. Some people really hate it. Just figure it out. And then you can ask people, how did they learn? So if they say that they learned, you could put that the way they learned here. If they say, I never really did learn, I don't do it, it's fine just to put NA. You got to have something in there, but just NA is fine when that's really the answer the client gave. And then this is where we've got no difference in eye gaze, some difference from what's generally expected. If they explicitly learned eye gaze, you could pick that one. Or if they just rarely or never look people in the eye, you could pick that one. And then finally, we've got the childhood questions. So just checking in about how were these things in childhood, and then the same, less, more pronounced, or no difference. And then the last social communication section is relationships. Relationships are really tricky in our adult evaluations. And this is largely because people have found workarounds. They've found ways to have friends. It's not going to be as simple as it might be in childhood, where maybe there just aren't any friends. And so you really have to get in there and understand the situation. So the first question is just really broad. Like, what's it like just getting together with a few people? Some examples for probes are there. Asking about if there's a friend or a best friend, asking to hear more about their friends. And then asking, have you ever lost friends? This can help you understand, the people who are maybe able to make friends but can't really sustain it. And then you have lots of different social options here. Just pick the closest one. Again, you might find that more than one kind of fits, and just pick what you think is right for you. The first option is about the client's report of like, who are their friends? And then the second one is like how readily they make friends and what it's like, how interested they are in it. Next, we ask about coworkers and bosses, fellow students, other relationships like that. So that's one of the complicated things about adulthood is we have lots of different kinds of relationships. One thing you might hear here is a client who is somebody who has friends, but they get in trouble at work because they don't treat their boss any differently from their friends. Well, that can really create a strain on their relationship, right? Their work relationship. People who share inappropriate information at work, something like that, that's the kind of stuff that goes here. Then there's a question about how well they maintain their relationships over time. That's in the yellow box. Social insight. How do you define friendship? What does it mean to you? How do you know when someone's your friend? Asking about their dating. You don't need to probe a lot if they're not comfortable with that, but just getting an idea of how they think about relationships. And then consider their answer. Was it a really good answer about their insight? Was it adequate? Was it limited? So an example of a good question, a good response when you ask about what is friendship, it's something that really talks about that give and take. It talks about the reciprocity and the work that goes into a relationship. An adequate response might be something that, friends are people you care about. It's a little more one-sided, but it's an accurate answer. And then a limited answer will be much more apparent. Childhood report of relationships is here. And then this is the same as you'd expect from the other questions. You also have some information from the childhood section that when you go to do this portion of the report will populate from the S1. So know that some of this, they might reference what they already said in the S1. You don't need to go through and rehash all of it, but just make sure there's nothing else you've missed there. And then that takes us up to repetitive behavior. So we will do that in the next video.